Anyway, let's get into some of the stories of the week, and then we'll get into our Bruins breakdown patented weekly evaluations. But we'll start with a couple of these stories that came up in terms of some of the bigger narratives, and then some of the narratives around the game. And then, of course, our player evaluations and tactical analysis and all that other good stuff. But one thing that's been interesting is this past week and a half really is life without David Krejci. Bring this up for a couple of reasons. One is we can talk about some of the players filling in for him a little bit later. But Krejci's name's been in some of the trade speculation lately, and with the season now past the quarter pole and the trade deadline being so awkward this year, of course, trade speculation is going to start picking up. And honestly, in a normal year, trade speculation for Krejci probably would have started before the season even started, given he is in the last year of his contract and is an older, about to be, or currently 35-year-old unrestricted free agent. A lot of these guys end up being guys you want to recoup assets for, rentals. Obviously, the Bruins are a team that's going for it, most likely. We hope that follows through, and they'd be the team trying to acquire a rental instead of getting rid of a rental. But nonetheless, Krejci's name is coming up because he fits a lot of the criteria for people that get talked about this time of year. So my first reaction is, please no, you just took Par Lindholm away from me. You can't take David Krejci away from me. But in all seriousness, I absolutely adore watching David Krejci play. And it's sort of interesting, though, because I'll read you a quote from Fluto Shinzawa on how Krejci plays and his comments around the trade deadline stuff. And he says, it's difficult to say whether this will make the Bruins a better team, referring to Krejci maybe leaving. It would certainly be different. Krejci tugs on his lines range tighter than the other centers, more so because of his cerebral, creative East-West style and his age. This is not necessarily how Cassidy wants to play. And so a couple of points for me on that. One is, that's why I love watching Krejci play so much, because that really stands out in his actions, behaviors. I also think it's what's making him continue to be successful at 35 years old. Playing super up-tempo at that age usually doesn't work, but if you're a guy who's heady, a guy who can slow the game down, you tend to last longer. And again, for me, it's more fun to watch, in my opinion. I'm not a fire wagon hockey kind of guy for whatever reason, for better or for worse. But the other thing this brings up for me, Ryan, is we seem to think Sweeney was behind a lot of the moves, letting go of Chara and Krug and a couple others. And we've now seen a number of Cassidy comments and folks referring to Cassidy in this way as wanting to play this much more straight line, up-tempo, south to north hockey. And so we've been really slagging on Sweeney for those decisions, or even maybe giving him credit for those decisions. Why has Cassidy been Teflon? Why has he not come up in these conversations around the changes in makeup of the team? And the more I'm seeing these comments, both from Cassidy and inferred from the folks who follow him most closely, is this really his stamp on the team, some of these decisions on personnel? Should we be giving him more critiques, maybe positive or negative, but just in general, should we be critiquing Cassidy more for these things than we are, and maybe easing off Sweeney a little bit?
I think that's a fair point. I think for reasonings, it's one, most people think personnel and they assume general manager. The other thing too is Cassidy has a little more, I don't want to say proven success, but accolades that you can fall back on. He was coach of the year last year. The team in some of the previous years kind of overachieved, it seemed like, at points of they were going through this kind of like retool rebuild, and it seemed to happen quicker than we anticipated, I think. And when the team tends to play better than you expect them to, you tend to chalk that up to coaching, and not necessarily the way that the team has been constructed. That might not be the right thing to do, but I think that's just kind of the more natural tendency. I think that it's really probably both of them. I think they're in agreement on how they want to play, and that could be somewhat of Cassidy dictating to Sweeney what he thinks is the best style for them to play, and then Sweeney going out and getting the guys that fit that, which is kind of a little bit different from, like, I was just listening to a lot of the fallout from some more of the Mike Babcock interviews and listening to about all the things of Dubas would get this guy because he wants to pair him with this guy. And Babcock would basically just kind of be like, well, if you get him, then I'm sitting the other guy. So I think they're a lot more kind of intertwined in how they're making these decisions. I would also be very sad if Krejci was traded away. I'm not going to be the most shocked if he's not traded and then still leaves via free agency. That would hurt a little bit too. But Krejci has been, I've had a kind of a weird take on Krejci for a while because he's always been one of my favorite Bruins, but I've also been like somewhat resigned to trading him for a long time. Not necessarily because I want to, but I think he was a guy that years ago when the Bruins were kind of hurting for goal scoring and looking for scores, he was a name that came up in a lot of trade talks. I remember like there was like a Krejci for Bobby Ryan thing that was floated at one point when Ryan was still with,
that did not age well,
when he was still with Anaheim. But like I think it was just that idea was planted in my head long enough ago that I started to think he was expendable. But he is informed a lot about even how I play hockey, and like I just play in beer league at this point. But I was never fantastic, but weirdly enough, not playing regularly, I'm probably better than I've ever been, and some of that's just because I'm bigger and stronger, and there's no checking anymore. And I was never big and didn't really want to get in there and mix it up at all. But some of it has also just been watching David Krejci has rubbed off on me in the way that I play, the way that I skate, the way I protect the puck. And I think that a lot of Bruins fans probably can say the same thing if they're players as well. It's also a move that like there are reasons why it would make sense, but there's even more why it would not. If you're in a playoff race or expecting to be in the playoffs, you're not trading away a player of his caliber unless you're getting getting somebody of similar or greater caliber, maybe with a little more term, or doing it as kind of a salary dump to make a parallel move at the same time to bring in another player in a separate trade. He's also a guy that's been a proven playoff performer. So as much as there's that risk of losing him for nothing at the end of the year, he's the guy that you want in the lineup when crunch time comes.
Yeah, and he's part of your leadership group too, and very much a Bruin in so many ways. I feel like ripping a guy like that out of the team in the middle of the season, it doesn't always feel good either, for that matter. So it's something to keep in mind too. Just to kind of put a loop on this before we go on to our next story, though, is it was a bit of a rough opening part of the week in Bruins land, and most of the fan base was really critical of Sweeney, and Cassidy largely got a pass. So just an interesting note there. But I agree with you. I don't think he's a guy that will be moved, but it's hard not to talk about him in that capacity given the variables. However, if for some reason the Bruins season tailspin this year, you could see a lot of teams being super psyched to get him if they have a hole at 2C or they really want to shore up their 3C. He does so many things well, so many things that translate to the playoffs. He could play a lot of different roles for you. He could match up. He actually is very capable as a matchup center. He can fill in on a power play if you're a team that needs some help on the power play. Obviously, if you're a Bruins fan, you want the season to keep going well and him to do all those things for you. Obviously, he needs to get healthy first. But if for some reason the season went sideways, you could really see someone being excited to get those services. So it makes sense that that's the conversation. But I hate that conversation, and I hope this is the last time we have it ever.